Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Arena, and as of today, we now have ourselves Ravnica Allegiance within the Arena client, which is wonderful. We get some brand new cards, and that means pack opening time. So, as I usually do with the pack openings, what I'm going to do is, as I open them, do a little bit of a card evaluation, what I think of these cards and things like that. Just basically a set review. We will be going through it a lot faster though as soon as the duplicates start showing up, so I won't be sticking around onto the same cards to do the re-evaluation, but that's common sense after all. So what we're going to be doing is opening about 100 packs of the Ravnica Allegiances. Now before I get into it, 5th copy protection has been implemented now into the new set, which actually means that you can no longer get 5th copies of commons, uncommons, and mythics. So if you get a 5th copy of a common or uncommon now, it actually adds to your vault progress. And if you get a mythic or a rare, you get 40 gems or 20 gems respectively for each of those. So something to keep in mind. So I did actually browse Reddit the other day, and I actually came across a wonderful little post that goes through the statistics or the outcome potential for 5th copy protection and how that affects people opening packs and their collections. So before we actually open the packs, I wanted to go through a few little things here, and I believe this post isn't entirely 100% accurate, and of course there is a little bit of random nature, there's a little bit of luck involved in some of this as well, but from this post, and I'll leave this in the description if you guys want to go and check it out as well. It is a fun little read if you're into numbers. But according to this post, approximately 125 packs will give you access to the full collection of commons and uncommons as well. So we're going to be opening about 100 packs today. So I should hopefully have virtually every single common and uncommon, and I believe that does include spending wildcards on it, and I do, as it currently stands, have 169 commons, 98 uncommons, 3 rares, and 2 mythic rares. We're going to keep track of that as well. There is a little bit of luck involved, as I mentioned. Some cards can have a chance of turning into wildcards, and there is a random upgrade chance as well in certain cases, I think, as well. But anyway, as I was saying, to get ourselves a full collection of both rares and commons and uncommons, you need approximately 213 packs, which means I'm probably going to be getting about half in today's video, but if you count the dailies that you do every single day, so every single day you get 1,000 gold to buy yourself a pack, and then you get the 15 wins per week, which is down here. This gives you 3 packs every single week. That actually comes to approximately 126 packs before the next set actually comes out, which means in my personal collection, if this is the only bit of money that I'm going to spend on the game, I will have actually opened up 226 packs. So in theory, I will actually have every rare in the set, and that doesn't include mythics, and I think that's probably where we might struggle in terms of building a collection. But regardless of that, mythics aren't very much the focus of a deck anyway. It mostly comes down to rares. So in that regard, it's actually not going to be too bad anyway in terms of collecting up a full collection, which means I actually get to build more decks that you guys submit as well. So I should mention, if you want to do that as well, that'd be mostly appreciated. We do have new set coming out this time around as well, so anyone who has submitted a deck to me in the past, it is probably outdated at this time. So if you do want to re-upload your decks with Ravnica Allegiance changes, or if you just want me to go ahead and make those changes myself if I come to a subscriber deck later on in the week, then be sure to let me know. You can either let me know down in the comment section below, or send me an email, or even chat to me in the Discord. The links are all down in the description below. Going to the Discord is great as well, so you should all do that, because I hang around there very, very frequently. So if you want to have a chat, you will get my full undivided attention quite a lot of the time in the Discord channel. So links down in the description for all of that. Anyway, without further ado, we're going to open up some packs. Now, I actually saved a bit of gold just before the new set came out, and that's afforded me about 10 Ravnica Allegiance packs. And as of this recording, I have not opened up a single pack of Ravnica Allegiance. So as you can maybe tell, we actually have every single card ready to be opened. Now, what I'm going to be doing is, after I'm finished with our pack openings, I'll probably come back through this just to have a look at the rares and mythics, see how far we've got. It should be noted that there are a few cases of cards that will not be opened whatsoever. Things like Donry City Smasher. I believe this is the one. This is actually a Planeswalker deck card, so I won't actually be opening these from packs, so the likelihood is that when we actually come to check out the collection at the end of this video, this will still be of 0-4, and there are a few cards like that as well. There's like Domri's Nodorog, I think this is another one as well. Yeah, this one searches up City Smasher. Very, very common kind of thing to have, but yeah, we're going to look through all of this later on in the video as well, just to see how far the 100 pack opening has got us. And according to this Reddit post as well, 100 packs looks about the sweet spot for anyone who wants to get a virtually full collection, so that you're not wasting a little bit of money, you know, after getting all of your dailies. If you plan on doing your dailies and your weeklies and things like that anyway, then this probably will end up being the sweet spot, I think, of monetary input, as it were. But without further ado, let's get into it. As I mentioned, we've got 10 packs there, and we're going to go and buy another 90 packs. Now, before I get into it, the newest buy a box promo is the Haunt of Hightower, and I absolutely love this card. I think it's great. I say it's great. I think it's a great, fun little card. I don't think it's particularly competitive, but I will actually be building a deck around this one. I have actually made plans for this ever since it got spoilt, so we're going to be doing that. 6 mana 3/3 legendary creature, so it dodges a fair amount of removal, moment of cravings, and obviously fungal infections. It gets around cast downs. It depends entirely on how the format shapes up, because we have got some new removal spells recently, like Mortify and Bedevil, which is hard casted removal, but those are rares, I believe, as well, so you might see those a little less. I'm not sure. But 6 mana for a 3/3 flying lifelink. It says when the Haunt of Hightower attacks, defending player discards a card. And whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a 1/1 counter on the Haunt of Hightower. Now, the card being put into our opponent's graveyard from anywhere actually just means anything in general. So if our opponent cracks an Evolving Wilds, that's going to put a counter on the Haunt. If our opponent plays a Shock to try kill the Haunt, that's going to put a counter on the Haunt. That kind of thing. If a creature dies, we get a counter. So this thing, hopefully, in theory, is going to be growing quite large, as well as controlling our opponent's hand as well by attacking and discarding cards and gaining absurd amounts of life. That's the hope anyway. I actually see this kind of in a Rakdos mid-range list, and that's something that I'm going to try it out in, probably following this pack opening video. So, without further ado, let's waste no more time. 18,000 gems is the cost for buying the 90 packs. You can only buy 20,000 gems, so we will have a few gems left over for drafts and things like that, which will probably take part in future streams. And yes, be sure to follow the Twitch streams to get notifications when those happen if you are interested in that kind of thing. Anyway, we got ourselves our 2 Haunt of Hightowers. We got ourselves 90 packs. So we're going to claim those, and we're going to enter the pack opening screen. 100 packs, let's go. Oh, also, before we get into that, there is also a code to redeem. For those who are unaware, if you go up into the store and go to the redeem code and type Play Allegiance, I'm not sure if it's case sensitive, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to say that it is. If you actually type this code into the redeem, press enter, you will get yourselves 3 free copies of Ravnica Allegiance for you guys to open. This is 1 per account as well, so be sure to spread the love and let your friends know that this is a code that can be redeemed for 3 extra codes. So we're actually going to be opening 103 packs. I lied. 103, let's go. So, pack number 1. We've got some pretty reasonable stuff. I'm kind of interested in Final Payment, a white and black instant speed. As an additional cost to cast a spell, pay 5 life or sacrifice a creature or enchantment, and it destroys a creature. So it's a 2 mana hard removal spell, which is pretty cool. The only downside is that you either have to pay 5 life or sacrifice a creature or enchantment. Now, from my perspective, I actually see this not being too terrible in life gain-based synergies or even Afterlife, because Afterlife is a new mechanic that says when a creature dies, you actually get some spirits equal to its afterlife cost. So that sacrifice creature downside is probably going to be the main way that you use this spell, and it's not really going to be too much of a downside because you get something back in return. The 5 life as well just makes me think like Dismember from Modern, which was like a pay 4 life in Phyrexian mana and then pay 1 kind of thing to give a creature -5/-5, effectively removing it just the same as Final Repayment. So I'm kind of interested to play around with this card. I actually think it could see a little bit of play as well with Font of Agonies, which I'm sure we'll see. That paying 5 life might actually be an upside as well, so something to be aware of. Not really going to talk about too much else here. I don't think there's too much of note. I suppose Thought Collapse is one of them. Counter target spell. Its controller puts the top 3 cards of the library into their graveyard. In a mill strategy, you might want to run this over Sinister Sabotage, but I think Sinister Sabotage most of the time is actually going to be a little bit better, but something to be aware of. Our rare is actually a mythic a rare wildcard, sorry. So, pretty good. Not too bad at all. As I mentioned, my Vault progress is currently at 57%, and I had, prior to this pack, I think it was 2 rares and 2 mythics. So, oh, Growth Chamber Guardian. I love this card. 2 mana 2/2 with Adapt 2 for 3 mana. When 1 or more counters are put on Growth Chamber Guardian, you may put search your library for another creature called Growth Chamber Guardian and put it into your hand. Now, this should be easy enough to pull off. There are plenty of ways to actually put the Adapt into there, and you can turn this guy into a 4/4 for 3 mana, which is pretty sweet. But just putting a counter on him, making him a 3/3 for 2, isn't terrible at all, and it also pulls another one. So if you see this card, the likelihood is that you're actually going to see all 4 of them, because they are very, very easy to pull out of the deck. Also, should be noted that this is an elf, so in elf ball strategies as well, this is a repeatable way to gain card advantage and make sure that you have more elves to cast into your Vanquishers banners and things like that. So I'm probably going to visit this card at some point in the future as well and try to change up the elf ball deck that I played not so long ago, because I actually think this card is sweet. Gates Ablaze is another one that I am quite surprised by. It's probably one of the few good gate cards in the format at the moment, and I think it's a pretty good card all the same. 3 mana, 2 and a red, to deal X damage to each creature, where X is the number of gates you control. So if you have 3 guild gates in play, this is a 3 damage to each creature, which is pretty good. That's a Deafening Clarion right off the bat. Now, the likelihood is that if you have 3 gates, it's going to be a turn 4 play, but that's not terrible, I don't think. But it does take a little bit of cost involved. Playing gates is obviously a downside, and you really need to make sure that you have that upside ready to go. But other than that, not too terrible. The rest of these are a little bit iffy, you know. There's just random draft chaff, really. Even the Wayfinder, I think, is pretty chaffy. Yeah, it looks at 4 cards, you reveal a creature or land and put it on top, so it's not even card advantage, it's just setting up the top card of your deck. Not too much of a fan of this one, but it is an elf, so maybe it has some value in there. Essentially in the elf ball strategy as well, being able to guarantee that there's an elf on top so you can draw and keep chaining together your draw. Maybe it'll see some use there, but I'm not entirely sure. The rest of it, pretty much chaff. I'm not going to go through it. Alright, High Alert! High Alert, I love this card. This is going to be the card that brings Arcades back to the jank forefront. 1 white and a blue for an enchantment. Each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Creatures you control can attack as though they didn't have Defender. So Arcades traditionally is a wall deck, so all walls tend to have Defender, and they're like 0/5, 0/4s, things like that, which this card turns them into 5/5, 6/6s, and things like that for very cheap. It could be a 2 mana 5/5 in the case of like Wall of Mist or something like that, which is absurd value. So High Alert is going to be your 5th and 8th copies of Arcades, essentially, depending on how many of these you want to put in. I am definitely going to be building an Arcades deck pretty soon because of this card specifically. I think this is just good enough to make sure that Arcades is not completely terrible. Because we played him before in the past, and you basically do nothing if you don't draw Arcades, but having 8 possible copies of the Arcades effect is going to be really useful. Of course, Arcades is better because he draws a card when you play a Defender. But other than that, High Alert is a solid card. Our rare, anyway, is Thrash and Threat. Thrash, 2 hybrid mana of green and red. Target creature you control deals damage to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. So this is actually maybe viable planeswalker removal, depending on the deck, of course. In Gruul decks, you probably will be quite aggro, but if you're going for like a slow Gruul ramp deck, this could actually see some play. It's probably one of the few cards actually that deals damage to Planeswalkers directly as well, which is very nice. Usually this kind of effect is a fight spell for just creatures alone, so I actually could see Thrash being quite useful, since Gruul does have quite the bulky creatures as well. This is likely to be a removal spell for creatures. Threat, on the other hand, is 2 and a red and a green for a sorcery speed. Create a 4/4 red and green beast token creature with trample. So if this Thrash isn't going to be useful to you for some ungodly reason, like if you play this main deck and you end up going against a control deck that doesn't run any creatures, then Threat at the very least is another way of playing this spell with some upside as well. So it's not the end of the world if you put this in your main deck and they don't have creatures, essentially, because you can still put one in play. Threat as well would also put a 4/4 in play for you to thrash with your next copy as well. Dealing 4 damage to a Planeswalker is getting it close to death as well, so that's kind of nice. Getting it close to death and having a 4/4 red and green beast with trample specifically as well could be all you need to actually close the distance and make sure that you actually finish off that Planeswalker. I really do actually like this card. I don't think it's tier 1 by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's useful all the same. Impassioned Orator is another one as well. 2 mana for a 2/2. When another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So the life gain strategy for each creature is essentially like Ajani's Protection on a creature. I quite like this one. It's going to be fun. I think we'll play it in any kind of Ajani's Pridemate deck because it would trigger the Pridemate that way. Pridemate, I believe, also had an errata recently as well, so that it's not a May ability for them putting counters on, which is both good and bad. It's good in terms of Arena because you don't have to constantly click, but it's bad because having a May ability for increasing the size of your creature is actually somewhat relevant, so it has been nerfed in terms of its competitiveness, but in terms of like its just ease of play and fun to play with, it's been improved, which is kind of cool. Other than that though, I don't think there's anything that I want to talk about in this pack that is worth note. Let's continue. Alright, Root Snare got a reprint. I like the art on this one actually. I think I prefer it over the old version, but that's about it. Quite kind of surprised that we see Root Snare being reprinted after the hate that Turbo Fog gets, but here we are. Other than that, I don't know if there's much to talk about. Ravager Worm. 3 red and a green for a 4/5 with Riot. Riot says when it enters the battlefield, you either get to choose a counter to put on it, or you give it haste instead. And when it enters the battlefield, you choose one of these 2 effects. Modal creatures traditionally are very, very powerful, just because they give you plenty of options. It's not going to be a card that's dead in some situations. This one's actually going to have some use most of the time, if not all of the time. Ravager Worm fights target creature you don't control, so pretty nice. A removal spell. 4/5 will kill a lot of stuff, and it will survive whatever it kills quite a lot of the time. But you can also choose to destroy target land with an activated ability that isn't a mana ability. So things that activate for anything other than generating mana. That does include Searcher's Canter. It does have a mana ability attached to it, but it also has an ability that does not generate mana. It allows you to search. So Searcher's Canter is played quite a lot these days. There is also Thematic Compass as well, the Spire that turns over. That's another one, as well as Arch of Araska. I think Ravager Worm actually could see a lot of land destruction uses in this particular format, so hopefully we'll end up seeing that. We even got another 4 mana land destruction spell as well. Rubble Reading. It allows you to scry too. I kind of like that. But they're not ever going to print a land destruction spell worth playing, I don't think, other than just like a meme strategy anyway, but here we are. 2 mana Scorch Mark. Deals 2 damage to target creature. If it would die instead, then you exile it. So it's instant speed, which is its upside, but it is also overcosted as a shock, and it is underpowered in terms of Lava Coil, so this card will not see play, even though it has Majora's Mask in it, which is kind of cool. But other than that, yep, let's move along. As I mentioned, I won't be going across the cards that we've seen before as well, so these will be going quicker as the opening goes along. Amplifier. This is a card that I want to love, but I can't. 2 mana and 2 red for a 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Until your next turn, Amplifier's base power becomes twice that card's power, and its base toughness becomes twice that card's toughness. Put the revealed cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, I did see the uses for this one being something like running Golter. If you had a Golter in your deck and Amplifier reveals it, then you have yourselves a 24/24 swinging over. The only problem is that Amplifier doesn't have any kind of evasion, which means that he can just get blocked by a 1/1, and that's the game over. The other application you could use it for, though, is something like Thud. If you did actually flip that Amplifier over into a Golter, and you did have your 24/24, you could use Thud to sacrifice it and deal 24 damage to your opponent's face. The only issue with all of that as well, in addition to not having evasion, is that Amplifier can reveal another copy of Amplifier, which means this is a 4-mana 2/2 with no evasion and no haste or anything of that sort. So it has some fun applications for instant kills in Standard at the moment, but it also does a hell of a lot of nothing quite a lot of the time. So it was a card that I was looking forward to playing until I read the last sentence and realized that there was just not enough to make me want to run this card ever again. Other than that, I think we're going to move on. Next, we have Wilderness Reclamation, everybody's most feared card coming out of Ravnica Allegiances. 4 mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. I have no idea why this is an uncommon. It does not seem like it should be. So essentially, this can double your mana on your end step if you choose to do it that way. So if you have a big instant spell that you want to cast, you can absolutely do it. Most people are looking at this card and thinking Turbo Fog, because this actually allows you to play Nexus of Fate very, very early on. So Turbo Fog is going to be eating up this card quite a lot. So if you are up against Turbo Fog and it does become popular, get your enchantment hate right into play. That Mortify that most people aren't blown away by might actually end up seeing some play just because of this card alone. We'll have to see on that one though. Other than that, we're going to move on. Hallowed Fountain. Sweet. This doesn't look like a fountain, but yeah, we'll accept it. That's that little cute little Thopter. Look at that. Sweet. Alright, moving on. I think Hallowed Fountain speaks for itself. Dual lands, everybody should get them. There's Mortify, as we mentioned earlier. 1, a white and a black, instant speed, destroy target creature or enchantment. So, I am going to be building an Orzhov control list pretty soon, and I think this actually deserves 1 or 2 slots in that deck. Being able to kill a creature for 3 mana. It's essentially murder with upside. In my Orzhov control deck at the moment, I use Cleansing Nova to deal with artifacts and enchantments. The only thing is that actually kills my own stuff, and my Orzhov control list is very artifact and enchantment focused. So having something like Mortify is actually going to be really useful to deal with those enchantments. Artifacts traditionally don't see too much play in Standard at the moment, but enchantments certainly do, especially with Wilderness Reclamation being around. Don't really want that to be the thing now, do we? Other than that, Essence Capture is a cool one. 2 blue mana for an instant speed. Counter target creature spell. Then you get to put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 creature you control. I reckon this will see a little bit of play in the sideboards of something like Mono Blue Tempo, if they really need to deal with creatures. Other than that, though, I don't see this being too playable. It's certainly not going to be played over Essence Scatter because it is harder to cast, and most decks these days are multicolored. So Mono Blue is going to be the only deck that will play this, and it has to be a creature deck that's Mono Blue focused. I could see this maybe in the Wizard Tribal deck that I built not so long ago, but again, we've got Wizard's Retort, so that's, yeah, it kind of comes out the same thing, really. I don't know if Essence Capture really beats it, but there you go. Our rare / mythic is Biogenic Ooze. Yes! I love this card. I actually want to spend my wild cards on a full play set of this, because I actually have a deck lined up for it. 5 mana, 3 and double green for a 2/2. When Biogenic Ooze enters the battlefield, you get to create a 2/2 green ooze creature token, and then at the beginning of your end step, you put a 1/1 counter on each ooze you control. You can also pay 1 and 3 green to create a 2/2 green ooze creature token, so it can go wide, essentially, and it becomes very, very big over a long period of time. So, pretty cool in that regard. I do enjoy this deck, this card quite a lot. The way that I see it being used is something like quasi-duplicate to make copies of it. The copies would make extra oozes, and those two main oozes would actually pump each other, as well as the ooze tokens that they're creating. Something also like Growing Rites of Itlamok is also going to be quite fun with ooze. If you can do some sort of big mana strategy with loads of mana dorks and things like that, get an ooze out early, and flip a Growing Rites, then you could actually use that ability to create oozes quite a lot, and it would exponentially increase over time as well. It's pretty cool. I enjoy this biogenic ooze quite a lot. It does die to a hell of a lot of stuff, so I don't see this being very competitive, because Shock is very much a viable card in the format right now, so something to be aware of. But if it does survive, then it will start slowly growing out of removal range. But as I mentioned, something like Quasi-Duplicate or a big ramp spell will really send this ooze over the top. So let's move on. In this pack, we got a little cutie. We got Footlight Fiend. I like this guy. Rakdos hybrid mana for a 1/1 devil. When it dies, it deals 1 damage to any target, so it's a reasonable way of enabling Spectacle. And Spectacle is basically a new mechanic from the Rakdos Guild that allows you to pay an alternative cost on certain creatures. We haven't really touched upon any of the Spectacle cards at the moment, because most of them are not particularly good, although there are a fair few of them that are quite top-notch. But yes, this is a nice way to generate Spectacle. Either you attack with your 1/1 and you enable Spectacle, or they block and it deals 1 damage to their face and enables it either way. So Footlight Fiend could see quite a little bit of play in some Spectacle aggro lists, because you want to be low to the ground. But yeah, other than that, he's just a little cutie. I like him. Our rare is Rix Mardy Reveler. Speaking of Spectacle, this is actually one of the few Spectacle cards that I think is pretty reasonable. 2 mana for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you discard a card, then you draw a card. However, if the Spectacle cost was paid, you can instead discard your entire hand and draw 3 cards. So it's kind of like a bad Bedlam Reveler in that sense. It's going to be a 4 mana 2/2 that allows you to draw 3 cards if your hand is empty. As we mentioned as well, Rakdos has plenty of ways of dealing the damage required to make Spectacle cost pretty cool and easy to cast as well. In the case of things like Footlight Fiend, it's not really going to cost you any mana around that turn 4 period as well. If you want to trigger your Footlight Fiend Spectacle, you can basically cast this Spectacle cost for exactly 4, and you won't need to spend any more mana on that one, which is kind of cool. Other than that, yeah, let's move on. We got Active Treasons, got a reprint for the 50,000th time, yay! Other than that, Forbidden Spirit, I think this is a Ghostly Prison, isn't it? 1/2 white for a 3/3, so reasonably costed for its mana cost. When it enters the battlefield until your next turn, creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays 2 for each of those creatures. This is interesting. We do have a few flicker effects in the format at the moment that have just come in from Ravnica Allegiances, as well as doing stuff like sticking Helm of the Host on this. That's a way that I could see this being quite funny, a repeatable Forbidding Spirit trigger to Ghostly Prison your opponent. With aggro being so prevalent, it actually could see a little bit of play, but it's only for 1 turn, so you're going to have to find a way to repeatedly use that effect to re-enter the battlefield constantly. And I don't know many decks that actually want to do that kind of thing at the moment. I also have Incubation and Incongruity. Incubation looks at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So the downside is this thing doesn't hit a land, doesn't hit anything else, so it has to hit a creature, which means this is going to go into any deck that has a very aggressive deck building restriction, and that is going to be heavy, heavy creatures. So if you can do that though, top 5 is actually a reasonable distance into your deck as well, where you can pretty much guarantee that Incubation is going to hit. I think you could probably run about 24 creatures and be next to guaranteed that Incubation is going to hit something most of the time. So, you know, it's pretty good. And Incongruity as well. 1 green and a blue. Instant speed. Exiles a creature. That creature's controller creates a 3/3 green frog lizard creature token. So, this is useful because in Simic, there aren't that many ways to destroy creatures. This is kind of one of them, and as long as you have something back to block that 3/3 green frog lizard, or a way to bounce it, then that upside for your opponent's not really going to come into play too much. It's not too bad at all. And our rare is Sphinx of the Foresight. Sphinx of Foresight is a 4-mana 4/4. You may reveal this card from your opening hand. If you do, scry 3 at the beginning of your first upkeep. This is an interesting one. It's one of the first turn 0 plays I think we've had in Standard in a very, very, very long time. So it's kind of cool there. It's also reasonably costed as well. A 4-mana 4/4 flyer is pretty good. And it also has the added ability as well to scry at the beginning of your upkeep as well. So you get to sort out the top of your deck, kind of similar to Search for Azcanta in that kind of regard, without the Surveil-ish kind of ability. I like this card. I don't know where it would see play. I don't think it's a mono blue tempo deck or anything like that, but being able to aggressively mulligan, I could maybe see this in a combo list, something like that, because combo doesn't really want to mulligan too aggressively, but the scry 3 upside from doing that kind of thing, as long as you hit a Sphinx, then you get to look at 3 cards and make sure that your next 3 draws are going to be reasonable. I actually don't mind this one in that regard. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't think it'll see too much play, but I can see an area where it would actually be used. So we got some drakes, we got some payments, we got nothing of note. Let's move on. We got Immolation Shaman, 1 and a red for a 1/3. When an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature, or land that isn't a mana ability, Immolation Shaman deals 1 damage to that player. So this is essentially, there was an Armenket dude that used to deal 2 damage for exactly the same reason. This is a downgraded version of that. I also think it was a 3/2 as well, which makes him a lot better than Immolating Shaman. And the previous version, the card that I'm on about now that I can't remember, he didn't see much play either in any kind of deck. So I don't really see this one being too powerful all that much as well. It's been nerfed a little bit. It does have an upside as well though. 3 double red for giving it +3/+3 and giving it Menace. That's fine, I guess. It's going to be, what, a 4/6? 4/6 Menace. It's not too bad. It will survive the attack, but spending 5 mana in a red deck is just not really going to happen. But other than that, moving on. Okay, apply Biomancy, 2 mana for choosing 1 or both. Target creature gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn, and return target creature to its owner's hand. If you're going to use both, this is probably going to be pre-combat kind of thing, because you don't really want to give your opponent the opportunity to block. Because you'll probably have to bounce the creature it's blocking and then your creature won't do anything, but it's a fine card, it's okay. Cindervines, red and a green. I love this card. When an opponent casts a non-creature spell, Creature Vines deals 1 damage to that player. You can also pay 1 to sacrifice it to destroy target artifact or enchantment, and deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller. So this is really good against control. It looks like control is getting a lot of hate in this new set. Getting this down very early gets it right underneath our opponent's counter spells, and in most control lists, dealing with enchantments isn't going to happen till turn 5, and that's going to be with like Cleansing Novas, so the likelihood is that this is going to stick around for a very long time, pinging your opponent. Whenever they counter a spell, they're going to lose 1 life, and they're likely to be countering some sort of aggressive burn deck. So yeah, I actually quite like this card, and it also has some endgame stuff as well. It can always destroy a Search for Azcanta or something like that and deal some additional damage on its way out. So I quite like this card a lot. I'll expect to see this in a lot of Gruul sideboards if control is an annoyance for that particular deck. But other than that, let's move along. We're almost to the point now where I can stop reading things and just go through the packs. But we're at 91, which is ridiculous. They also have Open the Gates, which is cool. It's like a Tune with Ether, but not as good. I actually read this at first and I thought, they banned a Tune with Ether, but then I remembered that it was actually the energy that it was generating that was making it broken and bannable. So in this particular case, this is one quite fair. 1 green mana for a sorcery speed. You search your library for a basic land card or gate card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So it's mana fixing essentially for green decks. All you have to do is lead off with 1 green mana, and you're sorted. Lavinia, Azorius Renegade, 1 white and 1 blue for a 2/2. Each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of lands that player controls, so they can't ramp into things, essentially. If they're using things like Gift of Paradise, they can't cast those spells. It could keep Nexus of Fate from being cast with the Wilderness Reclamation and Gift of Paradises and things like that. If your opponent doesn't have 7 mana actually, then they won't be able to cast Nexus, so that's kind of cool in that regard. It will slow down Turbo Fog. Other than that, I don't see too much use about this. I think this is more of a legacy card than anything else, but it might see a little bit of standard play on occasion. Depends on how the meta shifts up and sees what's on top at the end of all of that when the dust settles. Also says when an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. So there is actually a card called Electro Dominance, which I hope to open later on in the set as well, that says you can cast cards without paying their mana cost. Excuse me. This card will counter those spells, which is kind of cool, and there is no condition to that counter when it happens as well, so your opponent can't just pay 2 mana to negate it or anything like that. If they are casting something for free, it is gone. So Lavinia is kind of cool in that regard, but she does die to a lot of stuff, and yeah, she's going to see some fringe play. Sideboard tech at best, I would say. What else have we got? Galloping Lizrog, 5 mana for a 3/3 trample. When it enters the battlefield, you may remove any number of counters from among creatures you control. If you do, put twice that many counters on Galloping Lizrog. So this actually has Simic Ascendancy written all over it. Simic Ascendancy says that whenever a counter is placed on a creature, you put a counter on Simic Ascendancy, and if you put 20 counters on it, you win the game. So this is a good way of getting that trigger right away. So yeah, if you're going to see Lizrog in a list, expect Simic Ascendancy to be following very closely behind it. We also have Pitiless Pontiff, 2 mana for a 2/2 Vampire Cleric. You can pay 1 to sacrifice another creature, which is, I think this is the closest we're going to get to an Aristocrats build, which is sacrifice. Really do want to see free sacrifice, but this is about as close as we're going to get. For the price of sacrificing a creature, this card in particular gains Death Touch and Indestructible, which makes it a solid blocker actually. So you want to be sacrificing things with Afterlife, so you get yourselves your tokens back. If you can manage to do that, it's pretty sweet. But yeah, really would like it to be free, but here we are. Our rare is Gruul Spellbreaker. Gonna be a tier 1 standard card, I would say, this one. 1 red and a green for a 3/3 with Riot and Trample. So this one can either be a 3/3 haste or a 4/4 trample. As long as it's your turn, you and Gruul Spellbreaker have hexproof. So not only is this very difficult to deal with on the attack if you do give it haste, but it also gives you hexproof, which means that Settle the Wreckage is dead. So if you are up against a Gruul deck and you're holding your Settle, feeling very confident, your opponent can just drop down a Spellbreaker, give it haste, swing through, and your Settle the Wreckage is no longer useful. So it is going to see a lot of play in that regard, getting around the very early game board wipes. And it can even dodge the Deafening Clarions as well. If your opponent is in Boros, then you can give it 4/4 instead, and it will survive that, which is kind of cool. We also have Growth Spiral. I am going to be playing around with this card. I think it's pretty sweet. It's a nice tempo swing. And it's also a good way of digging through your deck and ramping. 1 green, 1 blue for an instant speed. You get to draw a card. Then you put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So this not only replaces itself, but it also potentially ramps you if you have additional lands in hand. I do have a Simic Lands deck as well, so this one will probably see play in that list. Digging deeper into your deck, ramping you into your more powerful things is pretty cool, and replacing itself as well. So it's essentially running like a 56 card deck with a little bit of tax involved in the converted mana cost there. Persistent Petitioners. This is the brand new Rat Colony from the format. It's very interesting. I don't think it's as good as Rat Colony, but it is certainly as fun. 1 and blue for a 1/3. You can pay 1 to tap it to put the top card of their library into their graveyard, which is cool. And you can tap 4 untapped advisors you control, so usually 4 Petitioners, to put the top 12 cards of target player's library into their graveyard. So that is a significant amount of mill there. If it's not immediately obvious, this is a mill equivalent of Rat Colony, which was the damaged version. And a deck, of course, can have any number of cards named Persistent Petitioners in it. So if you really hated Rat Colony and Pauper, Persistent Petitioners is really going to tickle your jimmies there, right there. This one's going to be very annoying because it doesn't die to the same things that Rat Colony dies to. So if you are in, like, you're playing your Pauper stuff, you're running all of your Chain Whirler effects, this one's going to dodge right through it. And yeah, it's going to be pretty cool and very annoying. Moving on. Have we got anything of note in here? We got ourselves another gate card. 3 mana 2/2 gets +1/+1 for each gate you control, so this is pretty powerful. And as long as you control 2 or more gates, which you would never run it in a deck without 2 or more gates available at all times, then it actually gains vigilance and trample, which makes this ram a big boy. So yeah, expect to see this if your opponent is slapping down guild gates left, right, and center. I have no reason to believe this card will not see play in that list. Our rare is Benthic Biomancer. 1 mana for a 1/1 Merfolk Wizard Mutant. So this one actually might see a little bit play in the Wizard Tribal deck that I built. A 1 mana 1/1 is fine. Whenever one more +1/+1 counters are put on the Biomancer, you get to draw a card, then discard a card. So it actually filters your deck a little bit as well. So if you are flooding out, you can just pay 2 mana to turn this guy into a 2/2. And draw and discard, which is kind of cool. The likelihood is you're not going to get much use out of that discarded card, but if you have some dead cards in hand, then it doesn't really matter. And the 2 mana for the Adapt 1 is a reasonable amount. So this one actually, in terms of like Merfolk, extra 1-drops is always nice. In terms of Wizards as well and Tempo, this one actually could see a little bit of play as well. No evasion though does make it a little bit iffy, but we'll have to see if that is going to be reasonable or not. Other than that, don't think there's too much to talk about here. I kind of like Scrabbling Claws, actually. 1 mana for an artifact. You get to exile a card from an opponent's graveyard. You get to, you don't get to choose which card that is, so you want to get this down as early as possible if you are planning to use this as graveyard hate. It's kind of like a Relic of Progenitus in that sense. You can also pay 1 to sacrifice it, and then you get to exile a target card from a graveyard and replace it. So if your opponent does go for like a Reanimator strategy and they target a card that you do not want your opponent to play, you get to sacrifice this and immediately discard it. If you get this down early enough, your opponent's going to have a hard enough time building up a graveyard, so that top side ability there is probably going to deal with it, but in the case that they might be cycling through their deck a little bit too fast, you can just pay the 1 at the bottom there to actually target something specific should you need to. Alright, really good Golgari here, I would say, that card. Most of this seems pretty much the same, so let's go straight to the rare. Priest of the Forgotten Gods, 2 mana for a 1/2. You get to tap it and sacrifice 2 other creatures. Any number of target players each loses 2 life and sacrifices a creature. You add 2 mana and draw a card. So you can break the synergy on this one pretty easily. As long as you're running an Orzhov deck and your opponent isn't, then you're going to be able to sacrifice things with Afterlife or maybe things with death triggers. So very useful in that sense as well. So being able to add some extra mana and draw a card as well and force your opponent to lose 2 life is very, very useful. I actually quite like this card. I don't know if it will see too much play. Being 2 toughness, it will die to virtually everything. But if your opponent is empty-handed, then this thing will go crazy. So yeah, pretty cool. Not too terrible at all. The rest of it, pretty terrible. Moving on. Most of this stuff we have seen. Our rare is going to be Plaza of Harmony. A land enters the battlefield. If you control 2 or more gates, you gain 3 life. You might need that if you're playing gates, because this the deck is traditionally quite slow. Adds 1 mana of any type that gate you control could produce. So it could be a 5 mana land later down the line. Only downside to this card, if you are running it in gates, is that it is not a gate itself, so it is not going to count towards your gate cost. I don't really like that all too much, and it's not going to give you any mana that you didn't already have either, so it's not mana fixing. It's an odd one. Maybe a 1 or 2 of in a gate deck, but other than that, probably not. Justicar's Portal. This was the flicker card that I mentioned earlier. 2 mana for an instant speed, exiles a creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. It gains first strike until the end of the turn. So our flicker spell has returned. Flicker is probably one of my favourite mechanics in Magic. I absolutely love it. For those who've been around since the Magic Jewels days, I had a Bant flicker deck that was very, very degenerate and awful, and I absolutely loved it. So it was pretty great. 2 mana to flicker a creature though and reuse the enter the battlefield ability is very useful. Also protects it from combat and removal, and also makes it a good combat blocker as well. If you have a tapped creature, you can untap it with Portal, get an enter the battlefield ability, and give it first strike, which makes it a profitable blocker 9 times out of 10. Very solid stuff. Other than that, not too much to note, except for Tithe Taker. 2 mana for a 2/1. During your turn, spells your opponent's cast cost 1 more to cast, and opponent abilities your opponents activate cost 1 more to activate unless they're mana abilities, and it also has Afterlife 1. This will see play in white weenie decks. It basically makes counter spells more expensive and makes instant speed board wipes like Settle the Wreckage more expensive as well. If your opponent has 4 mana in play and you drop down a Tithe Taker, they can no longer settle you, which makes that turn 4 protection very much worse. There is a lot of settle hate these days, which makes me wonder whether or not Settle the Wreckage is going to see too much play in the next standard format, as we are currently in. But other than that, yeah, it's pretty solid. I like it. If you are running White Weenie, you run this card, definitely. Let's put target creature card from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Gets +2/+0 until the end of the turn. And haste, and then sacrifices on your end step. I kind of like this card. It's very much dependent on your opponent running creatures, but in this format, in this day and age, that's probably likely to have some sort of effect, and maybe gaining an enter the battlefield effect from one of your opponent's creatures could be useful. Alright, Bankrupting Blood, 2 mana to draw 3 cards. The only downside is you have to sacrifice 2 creatures. This will not see play in anything outside of an Afterlife deck, and even then you have to be very, very creature focused. Other than that though, I do like the art. The art is solid. It's pretty sweet. I love it. We also have Smothering Tithe. I very much enjoy this card because I feel like not only is it a reasonable commander card as well that's probably going to see a lot of play in EDH, but it's also a 4-mana enchantment that says whenever your opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2, which they're never going to want to do unless they've got an excess amount of mana. If that player doesn't, you create a colorless treasure artifact creature token with sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color. So this is basically, if your opponent doesn't want you to have a treasure, they have to tax themselves for 2 mana every single turn. If they draw additional cards, it's going to trigger again, so against control, they're going to be using Chemisters and making you ramp up to. So not only is it a ramp spell in white, but it is also a card advantage as well if you run something like Treasure Map. I think these two go hand in hand in that regard. If you get Treasure Cove, then automatically whenever your opponent draws a card, they're going to have to pay that 2 mana. Otherwise, you get to draw a card as well, which means they are never going to get ahead of you in terms of card advantage. Smothering Tithe is awesome. I want to play around with this one. You can also force your opponent to draw cards as well, with something like Emergency Powers, which I think says discard your hand and draw 7. There's no way your opponent's going to be able to pay for all of that, so not only do you get to addendum in the start of your turn, but then your opponent either has to completely tap out to stop you from getting treasures, making the spell effectively free, or they just basically give you card advantage. It's pretty sweet. I love it. Other than that, let's move on. Alright, let's see. Goblin Gathering is a card that I like. I'm not sure if it's overly powerful, but I do like goblins. It is my favourite tribe of all time, so seeing this card makes me happy on so many levels. 3 mana for a sorcery. Create any number of 1/1 red goblin creature tokens equal to 2 plus the number of cards named Goblin Gathering in your graveyard. So the first one is a 3 mana create 2/2, so it's Bad Krenko's command. The next one is 3 mana for 3, which is Hordling Outburst, which is good. We saw a lot of play in Standard. The next one's purely upside. It's like Empty the Warrens with a little bit of Storm Count. And then the next one is also fine as well. If you can recast these repeatedly, or even copy them with something like Thousand Year Storm, this could be your Empty the Warrens in a Storm combo list, which is kind of fun. I like it. Rare Wildcard means I don't have to talk about it. Moving on. Collision is a new one. 2 mana to deal 6 damage to a target creature with flying. So that is probably not good because Plummet just kills the creature with flying in the same colours for the same cost. I'm not even sure if it's sorcery speed or not, but maybe it is. But you might want to play this for Colossus. Since the first half is bad, then you need to evaluate the second half to find out whether or not it's playable. Red and green, target creature gets +4/+2 and gets trample. Reasonable, but pump spells in Standard are not particularly popular these days. So this is probably a bad card overall. We have Biomancer's Familiar, yes. Simic colors for a 2/2. Activated abilities of creatures you control cost 2 less to activate. This effect cannot reduce the amount of mana, and ability costs 2 less than 1 mana. Good job, Wizards, for cutting out combo. So this one essentially is for Adapt. Adapt makes it very cheap, so a lot of Adapt spells these days are going to be 1 mana with a familiar in play. It also synergizes with Adapt as well. When you tap, the next time you target creature adapts, it adapts as though it had no +1/+1 counters on it, which means you can reuse Adapt effects as well, which is solid. You can tap this guy and then repeatedly pay like 1 green mana to adapt over and over again. So in the case of the elf crab, the one that pulls its copy of itself out of your deck, that's 1 green mana to repeatedly add 2 counters to it. So very, very powerful. If this card doesn't get killed and you have an adapt creature in play, it's going to get out of hand quite quickly because it has actually no end. It doesn't say you can only use this ability once as well, so pretty cool. Moving on, 80 packs. I've got to speed this one up, as I say every single time. Well, it's a good job, because everything in this pack is not worth talking about. There's the card I was just on about. Yeah, 1 green mana to adapt to, and you could do this as many times as humanly possible, so if you're in a mono-green deck, this is going to be pretty powerful. No evasion doesn't make it like the most powerful thing in the world, but it will make it so that your opponent has to block it every turn or remove it. After that, Rhythm of the Wild, here we go. This is tier 1 playable. 1 red and a green. Uncommon as well, which is really nice for free-to-play players. Creature spells you control can't be countered, so goodbye control in the blue-based decks anyway. And non-token creatures you control have Riot, which means you can bring out everything with haste or with an extra +1/+1 counter on it. Very, very solid stuff. This will see a lot of play, and I think it is currently seeing play. Though I haven't actually played any Ravnica Allegiances yet, and didn't really get much chance to check out the streamer event either, so who knows. Blood Crypt, seen it before. Glad to have another one. Carnival Carnage, 1 damage to creature or planeswalker, and then 1 damage to that permanent's controller. Meh. 4 mana for Carnage, 3 damage to target opponent, and that player discards 2 cards. This is the reason you would play it. It's, what's the name of that card? Blightning, I think it's called, but that was 3 mana. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'd run Carnage. Then again, if you're running a discard Rakdos list, then maybe you'll see some play. I'm not sure. Zertar Goblin. I will be playing with this card. It's not the most overpowered thing in the world. It is Gruul 2/2 with Riot, so it can be a 2/2 haste or a 3/3 for 2, which is reasonably costed. It's also a Goblin, so you can maybe guess why I'm going to be playing around with it. And a rare wildcard, pretty cool. Let's see what we got here. Nothing really of note. Everything we've really seen. And the Repudiate, that's the one, and Replicate. Repudiate is counter-target activated or triggered ability, so this can counter Planeswalker abilities, Planeswalker ultimates, that kind of thing. If your opponent activates the adapt cost, you could use it that way as well. I would not run this card for that effect alone, so the second half of this card needs to be good in order to make it worth running. So Replicate speaks for itself in that kind of name. Creates a token that's a copy of target creature you control, so it's basically quasi-duplicate that can't be reused. So if you want extra quasi-duplicate abilities, then Replicate is going to be useful, and obviously Repudiate does have some effect in fringe situations, so I don't know. I quite like this card. I don't really feel like it needs to be a rare, but here we are. But there you go. Let's move along. Drill Bit is Thoughtseize without the downside, so long as you get yourself some Spectacle. So let's identify its Spectacle. 1 black mana to reveal our opponent's hand, and then you get to choose a non-land card from it, and that player discards that card. So in most black decks these days, the sideboard contains Duresses. This one, if you are running Spectacle, will be that replacement, because it is easy enough to trigger Spectacle, and 1 mana to just take any card makes it a better Thought Erasure, makes it a better Duress. So pretty sweet in that regard. Let's move on. We got Skagan Hellkite. This guy I expect to see a lot of play. It's a dragon as well, so dragon decks, you got ourselves a new piece. 5 mana for a 4/4 Riot Flying, so it could be a 5/5 flyer, or a 4/4 with haste. He also has the activated ability as well of 3 and a red to deal 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. Activate this ability only if Skagan Hellkite has a counter on it. So the Riot will immediately put a counter on it, so there is no real difficulty in using that ability, but you do obviously have to make a decision whether or not you want to use that ability down the line, or just have it have haste as a 4/4 flyer. It's a really solid option as well. That 2 damage divided as you choose as well to any target is going to be insanely good. Insanely good. Other than that, moving on. Anything to note? All the same stuff again. Spawn of Mayhem. Mythic. 4 mana 4/4 with Spectacle to make it a 3 mana 4/4 with Flying and Trample. Very nice. At the beginning of your upkeep, Spawn of Mayhem deals 1 damage to each player, so triggering Spectacle. Once this guy's out, Spectacle becomes very easy to trigger. If you got 10 or less life as well, he puts a counter on himself and makes himself a lot bigger, which means if you are in a disadvantage in the matchup, this actually could help you swing it in your favor just by being disadvantaged. You could maybe get yourself down to that 10 or less life. If you're running something like Font of Agonies, which benefits from paying life, maybe you could take yourself down to that level just immediately within a few turns and get this guy down as well. But he will continue to ping yourself if you are at 10 or less life, so you have to be very careful with that in that sense. Other than that, moving on. Nothing to note. Lumbering Battlement. I love this card. 5 mana 4/5 with Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, exile any number of non-token creatures you control until it leaves the battlefield. So you can exile your entire board, and then you can remove it somehow with maybe the 2 mana Flicker spell, which will bring every single creature back into play, which triggers a lot of enter the battlefield abilities. I actually see this card seeing a little bit of play if you are running Flicker. I will be playing around with it, certainly. And it gets +2/+2 as well for each card exiled with it, so you can protect yourself against a board wipe, because it is until it leaves the battlefield, so if it gets exiled, you're going to get that stuff back. If it gets destroyed, you're going to get stuff back. It's a nice flavor win as well. It's everything gets aboard the battlement and pumps it, so it's more powerful for having everything under it. And it has Vigilance as well, which means that it's going to be a really good attacker and a really good blocker. And yeah, it's going to be solid. I think as long as you've got plenty of things with enter the battlefield underneath this thing, it's going to be disgusting when it finally dies and everything enters the field. It's going to be fun. Moving on. Shark to Crab, wonderfully named. I'm just going to leave it at that. Shark to Crab is amazing. Absorb. Absorb is 1 double blue, instant speed, counter target spell. You gain 3 life. Now, this card is not better than Sinister Sabotage in terms of the straight up ability. I think I would rather take the easier to cast spell and also the Surveil as well. However, in a aggro format that we find ourselves in, Absorb actually with that 3 life gain is going to be quite relevant. So if it does become very aggro focused, if you may be playing best of 1 where aggro does actually rule at the moment, then Absorb actually could see a little bit of play. It's going to be an interesting one. It's very meta dependent, but if you're not going to be under too much threat, then you want to be running yourself Sinister Sabotage. But if you are constantly getting hit with burn spells, countering a lightning strike and gaining 3 life is a 6-point swing that you otherwise might not have had if you had Sinister Sabotage. It's pretty cool in that regard. Alright, Skewer the Critics. Speaking of Mono Red, this one is yet again another Lightning Bolt for Mono Red. Do not know why they printed this. Mono Red did not need any more tools. It's a 3 mana sorcery, deals 3 damage to any target. However, if you have Spectacle, which is almost guaranteed in a red deck, if you do not trigger Spectacle as Mono Red, you are losing. So, yes. 1 mana, deal 3 damage to any target is stupid. That's all I'll say about that one. Cry of the Carnarium is 1 double black for a sorcery speed. All creatures get -2/-2 until the end of the turn, so it's Golden Demise, which without the one-sidedness of the Ascend. And the upside is that it exiles all creature cards from all graveyards that were put there into the battlefield this turn. If a creature would die, it would be exiled instead. So there's no death triggers, which is very relevant against the Orzhov decks. Also, Golgari midrange at the moment. There are a lot of explore creatures, so being able to kill things with -2/-2 hits a hell of a lot of stuff in that deck, including Midnight Reaper, which would not get a death trigger. So Cry of the Carnarium could actually see a fair bit of play. It's very good against Golgari midrange, turns their finalities into pretty mediocre cards. So main deckable, quite likely in a mono black deck or some sort of black deck. Yes!
I'm gonna make you suffer.
Yes! Kaya, Orzhov Usurper. 3 mana for a 3 loyalty legendary planeswalker. Not the most powerful planeswalker in the world, I will establish that right now, but I am still very much excited for her, for the reason that she is very good at interrupting graveyards. +1, exile up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard. You gain 2 life if at least 1 creature card was exiled this way. So Drakes, you can suck a fat one. I am going to exile all of your graveyard and probably kill all of your Drakes and exile them and gain life. It's going to be sweet. Golgari midrange as well. Will really hate this card. I will be taking all of your cards so that your fine finalities do absolutely nothing. You will never get your planeswalkers back with your the 4 mana dude. I've forgotten him because I hate him. Anyway, the -1 exiles target non-land permanent with converted mana will cost 1 or less. Pretty dead, probably never going to happen. And the -5, Kaya Orzhov Usurper deals damage to target player equal to the number of cards that player owns in exile, and you gain that much life. Golgari Finebroker, that's his name. I've remembered him now. Yes, that guy. The -5 actually could be pretty reasonable. It's a nice way to close out the game. If you are playing in current standard, you will know that Jumpstart is a thing, and Jumpstart cards get exiled when they're cast for the second time, and they're played in quite a lot of decks. So your opponent does help you in that sense by adding extra cards to the exile zone. But yes, being able to exile 2 cards a turn, in a lot of decks these days that really do use the graveyard, I do like Kaya. She's probably not main deckable, but in the sideboard I think she is a superb graveyard attacker, so I do like her a lot. Moving on. Pack number 69, here we go. Cult Guildmage, all of the Guildmages have returned once more. This one, 4 mana to discard a card. You can do it at sorcery speed. That's fine, I guess. Sorcery speed means that your opponent can't use it on your draw step, which is a good way of breaking the game. So this would be a permanent lock if you had 0 cards in hand and that was not sorcery speed. Other than that though, so it's a fair thing to write down on that card. Be very explicit. 1 red and tap, deal 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker is meh, but whatever. I don't think that'd be too useful. Other than that, we also have the Simic Guildmage here as well. Actually, 2 mana 2/2. Merfolk Wizard, reasonable. When you tap it for green, each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter on it, which is kind of cool. And you can tap it for blue to move counters from creatures you control onto another target. So Adapt says that you can use the Adapt so long as it doesn't have counters on it. Combine Guildmage, being able to move counters to maybe cards that do not have Adapt, allows you to reuse the cards that do have it, which is kind of cool. I like it. The rare is Theatre of Horrors. Ah, yes. 3 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. During your turn, if an opponent lost life this turn, so Spectacle, you may play the exiled cards with Theatre of Horrors. Now, you can actually keep exiling cards for the entirety of the game, and they will stack underneath this thing, and as soon as you deal damage, then you get to cast those spells. So initially I actually misread this card and thought it was terrible, because if you don't activate your Spectacle, then there is a card that's underneath it that is uncastable, but that's actually not the case at all. You actually get to cast these whenever Spectacle gets triggered, which is kind of cool. So it is card advantage in Rakdos. I actually see this maybe seeing a little bit of play as a 2 or maybe a 3 of at push, but we'll see. 4 mana, 3 in a red. Theatre of Horrors deals 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. So that's one way that this card on its own as well can activate the Spectacle cost. So it actually can benefit from its own abilities as well, which is cool. I like it. Moving on. Let's go. We got work to do. Mythic Wildcard, speaking of, thank you very much, Arena. I appreciate you. That's very nice of you to do that for me. Eyes Everywhere is fun. That will be all I'll say about this. It probably won't see much play, but it's fun. It does stuff. Simic Ascendancy, yay! 2 mana enchantment. We've talked about this one, so I'm not going to run too much on it, but it is an alternative win condition, and I do love alternative you win the game cards. It can put a counter on a creature you control, and if you have 20 or more counters, you win the game. So pretty fun if you can get this down early and you can start throwing counters left, right, and center. I believe moving counters also triggers the ability as well, so you don't actually have to have 20 counters individually placed. They could be existing counters moving from creature to creature, and we do have a few creatures that allow you to do that as well, so pretty cool. Gateway Plaza, I think this is a reprint. It is. Alright, nothing to see here except for the rare, which is Mass Manipulation. I do like this card. 4 blue mana and double X, sorcery speed, gain control of X target creatures and or planeswalkers. So, for 6 mana, you can take your opponents to Fairy, and they don't get it back, which is cool. I like it. That's all I'll say about this one. It speaks for itself, really. Mono blue deck, if it's doing any kind of ramp, then it'd be cool. Which is hard in blue, I'll admit, but there you go. Teysa Karlov. I like this card. 4 mana for a 2 white and a black 2/4. Legendary creature. If a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So this is Panharmonicon for death triggers, essentially. Or Naban, if you're a wizard tribal fanatic. It is also a Naban Harmonicon kind of thing. Creature tokens you control have Vigilance and Lifelink. Very nice. This is going to go in an Afterlife deck, essentially, with sacrifice abilities, most likely. Elenda, I think she's called the Dusk Rose. She's going to be a great combo with Teysa because she triggers off of death triggers and she has a death trigger of her own, which means she's going to be triggering left, right, and center. Teysa is very good. I do want to try that out. I don't currently have any Elendas though, which is kind of an issue. So we'll see about that one. It might be a little bit down the line, but I do plan on making a Teysa deck at some point in the future. No Emergency Powers yet, which is one of my favourite cards from the set. Hopefully we get to open that one soon. Here's the Orzhov version of the XXXY variant mechanic here. 3/4, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card and you gain 3 life. There's a Flicker target right there for our 2 mana Flicker spell, as well as our Battlement dude. This is going to be pretty cool to flicker repeatedly. If you actually, the Flicker spell is instant speed, so you could do this on your draw step, on your opponent's draw step. If you flicker this, then the card that they draw for the turn, as long as it's not instant speed, they will immediately discard it and will not be able to play it. So that's a pretty cool effect there. An Ethereal Absolution. Hello, Elish Norn. 6 mana, 4 white and a black for an enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+1, which is pretty cool in Orzhov, which is very spirit focused. And creatures your opponents control get -1/-1. So it's a 6 mana, 2 damage, power and toughness swing, let's say. Pretty nice. It also has a extra ability here as well. 2, a white and a black. Exile target card from an opponent's graveyard. If it was a creature, you get to put a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield, so useful against the Golgari mid-range lists. I'm very happy to see all of the old guilds getting some very, very mean cards to be played against them. Very much appreciate that kind of stuff. I like the card. It's probably going to be a 2 max in most decks, and even then it's going to be very top end. Frilled Mystic. I like this one. Here's a Simic version of the XXXY. 3/2 with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you may counter target spell. So it's a hard counter on a body. It's also an elf wizard. So those are 2 very, very relevant creature types there as well. I'm not sure if wizards really wants to splash into green, but elves is already there. And there's apparently a fair few blue wizards, blue elves coming out these days, so pretty cool. Pretty cool indeed. I'm not sure this is going to be in a tribal synergy, but if it is, then it's going to be a solid inclusion. Nikia of the Old Ways. I do love this card. Solid art as well. Well done, Ryan. You have done some fabulous work here. 5 mana for a 5/5, legendary creature, so hard to kill. You can't cast non-creature spells. However, whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana of any type that land produced. So it doubles your mana essentially, but it stops you from playing creature spells. Speaks for itself. This is going to be in a deck that only runs creatures, so you want loads and loads of utility creatures in Gruul, and you basically want to ramp up into stuff. I have some plans for Nikia. It's going to be quite amusing to see it go. But yeah, it's a really nice deck building restriction. I really do love cards that put a restriction for a very good upside, and this is one of them. What do we got? Nothing of note. And Glass of the Guild Pack, 2 mana artifact, multicolored creatures you control get +1/+1. So multicolored matters, dot card. I like this card. There are because of the nature of Ravnica. There are a lot of multicolored creatures in the format right now, so if you can make a multicolored creatures matter deck, then this is going to be definitely a 4 of in that list. I will certainly be one of those people trying to make this card broken. And Deputy of Detention. Now, this is a wizard that I'm very interested in playing. 1 white and a blue for a 1/3 wizard. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls and all other non-land permanents that player controls with the same name as that permanent until Deputy of Detention leaves the battlefield. So multiple copies, which means like Growth Chamber Guardians are going to get all 4 of those in one go. Creature tokens, things like Goblin, that is the name of the token. It's going to basically be a token board wipe, which is very nice as well in that sense. So the current Wizards list that I run doesn't really like things that go wide, and things that go wide these days are tokens, so being able to take care of all the soldier tokens in one go, something like that, maybe the go wide strategies. I think Deputy of Detention's probably worth splashing for. We're going to have to see how many other wizards are in white though, see if it's going to be a little light splash or if it's actually just going to turn into Azorius wizards. Other than that, nothing really of note. And Imperious Oligarch, something like that. 2 mana, 2/1, Vigilance, and Afterlife 1. Pretty cool. We also have Syndicate Guildmage, 2 mana, 2/2, same cost as everything else, and the Guildmage cycle. You can pay 1 and a white, attack a creature with power 4 or greater, so locking down those very, very powerful threats. You can also pay 5 and tap it to deal 2 damage to target opponent on Planeswalker. Not a fan of that second ability. I don't see this seeing much play at all, but the Guild Mages are pretty underwhelming compared to previous Ravnica sets anyway, so it's no surprises there. What is that? What is that voice? Oh man. 4 mana legendary Planeswalker with 5 loyalty, so a nice start. You can +1 to add mana, and it gains Riot on a creature, if that is what's spent to cast on it, which is kind of cool. I like it. The -3 looks at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 target creature cards from among them, which this is going to go in a creature-focused deck anyway, so that is likely to hit quite a lot of stuff. You put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, so not into the graveyard, which is downside, but, you know, we're already asking for too much at that point. The -8 says you get an emblem with the beginning of your end step. You create a 4/4 red and green beast creature token with trample. That's fine. I think there are better ultimates than Domri, but really I think what you want to be using this Planeswalker for is that +1 most of the time anyway, so you're going to be working up to that -8, and having the emblem is just pure upside at that point. But yeah, giving all creatures Riot is very nice. If you're not running the 3 mana enchantment that does that anyway, then Domri is one way of going about getting that ability. I kind of like this card quite a lot, and it survives a lot of removal as well. Alrighty then, Sphinx of the Guild Pact. I'm happy to see this card because it's one of the very few cards that is all colours without actually being all colours. 7 mana colourless, hexproof from monocolored makes it pretty good as well. A lot of the removal these days is monocolored. However, in the newest set we have a lot of multicolored removal, so it's probably going to die to the things that are in this set. So it depends on whether or not our opponents are still running things like Cast Down and Vraska's Contempt. In that case, this will survive all of those stuff. So the pre-set decks that we have in the format, this would have been good against, even though it's slightly too expensive for my liking, but there we go. But yeah, we'll have to see. Hero of Precinct 1, 2 mana, 2/2 human warrior. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, create a 1/1 white human creature token. It's a shame that the tokens are not also multicolored, because then the that 2 mana artifact that I mentioned earlier that gives multicolored creatures +1/+1 would be ever so more powerful, and Hero of Precinct 1 would actually see a little bit more play. I think it's kind of cool though. In a multicolored matters deck, it's going to be one of the cards that's not multicolored, so it's not going to trigger off of the other copies. This is a downside, but it's fine, I suppose. We got Ill-Gotten Inheritance, 4 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain life. So this is a way to trigger Spectacle if you want to do it that way. But you can also pay 5 and a black to sacrifice it and deal 4 damage to target opponent. You gain 4 life. This is kind of like an inevitable win con. It's very slow. I don't think it'll see too much play as a 4 mana enchantment. If it was maybe starting at turn 3, then I could see this being useful, but for the most part, not so much at all. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the Armenket enchantments, the ones that make you choose between sacking a creature, discarding, or losing life. It's just a slightly worse version than that, and that didn't see much play either. I had a lot of fun with them, though. What do we got? Nothing new. And Tome of the Guild Pact, 5 mana artifact. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, draw a card. So all of your multicolored spells become cantrips. Very nice. And it adds 1 mana of any color, so it is also a mana rock in that sense. It's very expensive to cast, but it is a nice effect to have all the same. Other than that, so it's fine. Let's push through these ones, shall we? Bedevil, there it is. Ask and ye shall receive. Double black and a red for an instant speed. Destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. I quite like this card. If you're in Rakdos, it's going to be easy enough to cast. Just so long as you've crafted all of your dual lands, chat. Make sure you get all of your dual lands. It's very important. So you can play cards like this. Very, very flexible 3 mana removal spell. It is a murder. It is a Dreadbore. And it's also a pretty decent artifact removal as well. I can't think of the artifact equivalent in Rakdos. But there you go. It's pretty reasonable. Alright. Nothing new here. Kaya's Wrath. The new board wipe that I'm very excited about. Double white, double black, sorcery. Destroy all creatures. You gain life equal to the number of creatures you controlled that were destroyed this way. So I'm going to be running this in my Orzhov control list that wins with Dawn of Hope, because a lot of the time when you are wiping the board in the Orzhov list, you don't really care about killing your own creatures, because Dawn of Hope is repeatable creatures anyway. So this is going to be cheaper than Cleansing Nova, at the same price as Settle the Wreckage, without the downside of giving your opponents lands, or the downside of potentially just not being able to cast it with Gruul Spellbreaker. This one's actually just going to wipe the board clean. I really like this card a lot in specific decks. As I mentioned, Orzhov Control, the one that I've run in the past. I'm going to be revisiting that one pretty soon as well. So I'm going to be playing around with this card. It's going to see maybe a 2 or 3 of in that list. We're going to have to see on that one, but yeah. Gaining life equal to the number of creatures you controlled is very nice. It means that when you do wipe your board of your tokens, you're going to get some compensation where you otherwise wouldn't have. Next pack. I am on the verge of losing my voice. I've been talking for far too long. Consecrate and Consume. Consecrate is 2 mana for an instant speed. Exile target card from a graveyard and draw a card. Probably won't see too much play, though, in maybe the amulet lists that we tend to run on this channel occasionally. It is a cantrip that can be useful. The Consume, though, is most likely going to be the side that you use if you are to run this card seriously. 2 and a white and a black, sorcery speed. Target player sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control, which is basically 9 times out of 10 the creature you want to die anyway, and you gain life equal to its power, so pretty useful. If your opponent drops a Golter, you're going to gain 12 life for 4 mana and kill the biggest creature on the board, so not too bad. Also, likely hits Carnage Tyrant, which otherwise has hexproof and is very hard to target, so Consume might see a little bit of play in sideboards, who knows. Seraph of the Scales. 2 and a white and a black for a 4/3 flyer, reasonably costed. You can pay white to give it Vigilance, or you can pay black to give it Death Touch. So it's a very nice attacker and blocker as well. And also has Afterlife 2, so if it dies, we get ourselves 2 1/1 white and black spirit creature tokens with flying. So it replaces itself with 2 power and 2 toughness as well, which is nice. Nice. Anything that actually benefits from dying is very good in most formats. There's some modifiers. Pretty cool. Captive Audience. I love this card. I want to build around this at some point. 7 mana, which makes it very hard to get to, but once you do, it ends the battlefield under the control of an opponent of your choice, which is very interesting, because the fact that it's not on your side actually means that there are a certain amount of cards that do not deal with this. Things like Assassin's Trophy only exiles, only destroys permanents your opponent's control, so this being under your opponent's control means that they can't target it. Same goes for the Conclave Tribunals as well. I think maybe even Ixalan's Binding. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure about that one. But even like Ixalan's Binding on a captive audience means that they can't cast captive audience, so you can just recast yours. So it really dodges quite a lot of removal, surprisingly. It also has a homunculus right there as well. Let's just mention that. But yes, at the beginning of your upkeep, the person who owns this card, not controls it, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Your life total becomes 4. Oh, sorry, no, it is their choice. Sorry. Your life total becomes 4. I think it is anyway. Beginning of your upkeep, choose one that hasn't been chosen. I don't know. I can't figure that one out. Either way, doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Your life total becomes 4. You discard your hand, or each opponent creates... Yeah, it is something they do then, I think. Each opponent creates 5 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. So, it is very much going to kill your opponent. It will win on its own. So the life total becoming 4 is just out of burn range. But the tokens that they'll be eventually forced to give you will cover that 4 life total just fine. Discarding the hand as well means that they're going to have less answers, and they're basically on top decks to try and answer this thing. So it's very important that that is the case, since it is 7 mana, and it does not want to be removed. If you are casting this, you really want it to be an instant win. Anyway, moving on. Dispose and deploy. Tap target creature and draw a card. On deploy is 4 mana to make some Thopters that are quite cute. Let's see, with flying you gain 1 life for each creature control. So I can see this in some tempo lists. I believe there's a new card as well that benefits from creatures being tapped and not through combat. So depose, sorry. Could see some play there. It might actually be a reasonable tempo card in Azorius. We'll have to see though. Yeah. Time will tell. Electrodominance. Love this card. Double red and an X. It's essentially Banefire that is counterable, but with an extra little bit of spice attached to it. Instant speed as well, so you can do this on your opponent's end step with extra upside. Electrodominance deals X damage to any target. You can cast a card with converted mana cost X or less from your hand without paying its mana cost, which means you can play things that are sorcery speed, and you can play permanents as well, like enchantments, artifacts, planeswalkers, and creatures. You can do all of that on your opponent's end step with Electrodominance. So this is going to be pretty fun to play around with, mostly in Modern though, I think. 2 mana to do it for X, and then you can play some like 0 cost cards like Restore Balance and Living End, things like that. But in Standard, it's probably going to be used as a big spell. The reason why I'm not blown away by this card is mostly because that X spell is probably going to be enough to kill your opponent anyway if you built your deck right. So the card that comes off of the free cast essentially is probably not going to be entirely relevant. I wouldn't build it around doing the second half of this deck. I would probably just hope that Electrodominance is very good on its own, and then it has some upside attached to it to make sure that it actually finishes your opponent. Cool card though, cool card. I think I've got a reasonable collection going. There's a few rares and mythics that I haven't seen yet that I would have liked to have seen, but here we are. Warrant, hybrid mana, 2 mana. Put target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library. That's usually like a 4 mana cost effect, I think. Huh. That's useful. It's a nice tempo swing. It puts it back on top of your opponent's library, which means that they're forced to recast it, as well as forcing them to draw the same card repeatedly. I actually kind of like Warrant, actually. I don't think it's going to be terribly powerful, but it's usually something that's resided to like a 4 mana effect. So, kind of nice. Certainly nothing as cheap as 2 mana anyway. Warden, 5 mana. Create a 4/4 white and blue Sphinx creature token with flying and vigilance. Yeah, it's reasonably costed. I like it. So it's got a bit of removal, pseudo removal, with a bit of upside. Not too bad at all. My throat is on fire, and my tea's gone cold. Oh well. Verity Circle, there's the card that I was talking about. Whenever I mention a card, it pops up a few packs later. Very interesting. Verity Circle, 3 mana, 2 and a blue. Enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped, if it wasn't declared as an attacker, you may draw a card, which means all of those spells that say tap a creature, things like that are going to now have draw a card effectively written on the bottom of them. So it's really cool. It's going to have to be a build-around deck, and I'm not sure if it's going to be worth it, but honestly, like, tapping a creature and drawing a card is kind of cool. I could see this maybe in an amulet list that uses tap effects to prevent damage instead. It's going to be fun. It also has the ability to trigger itself as well, pay 5 mana to tap a creature without flying, so if you have mana left over, you can pay that to draw a card, essentially. Nope, nothing there. Judith! There she is. I've been waiting for you. 3 mana for a 2/2, legendary creature. Other creatures you control get +1/+0, so she makes all of her attackers very, very useful. And whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith deals 1 damage to any target, so she can machine gun down planeswalkers, creatures, or even just hit players. If you are attacking through, then your opponent is forced to block, and then the damage is going to be exceptional. Judith is going to be like a 4-of in a few Rakdos decks, I would imagine. Very much an aggro list, very much also aristocrats focused as well. Solid art, and she is awesome. At the end of the show, she stands alone on a stage, brilliant with blood. Pretty cool. Moving on. Nothing, no. Font of Agonies, yes! I want to build around this one as well. 1 black enchantment. Whenever you pay life, you put that many counters on Font of Agonies. And you can pay 1 and a black to remove 4 blood counters to destroy a creature. Now, paying life is not terribly easy to do in this format, but we have the final payment, which allows you to pay 5 life as a cost. So if we paid that 5 life, we'd put 5 counters on Font of Agonies, so not only will we destroy a creature with the final payment, but it would also put 5 counters on so that we could remove 4 of them to destroy a creature, so it basically doubles up the effectiveness of final payment in that sense. You can also use Shocklands as well. If we are in Orzhov, then we would use our Godless Shrines. Shocking in 2 life would give you half of the requirement for Font of Agonies, so Font of Agonies as well would stack. If you did have 2 of these, then you would be getting counters doubling up as well, which would be kind of nice. It's cool. I like it. The more Font of Agonies, the better. The more removal, you'd eventually start locking creatures out. You would need some sort of life gain synergy as well, but we do currently have things like Dawn of Hope and Fountain of Renewal in the format right now, so gaining life wouldn't be too difficult. You can also use things like Argal's Bloodfast as well to pay 2 life and draw a card. That would get you a removal spell every single time you used it twice in a turn cycle or something like that as well. So very useful there. I like it. Incubation Druid. I need a 4 of these, so I'm glad to at least have 1 of them. 2 mana for an 0/2. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any type the land you control could produce. And if it has a +1/+1 counter on it, add 3 mana of any type instead. You can pay 5 mana to adapt 3 as well to make it a 3/5 mana dork. Pretty cool. So it does die to a lot of stuff. That is the downside. However, you're going to be putting this in a deck where you are trying to put a counter on it. So one combo that I know about is New Horizons. New Horizons is a 3 mana, similar to Gift of Paradise, which you do see quite a lot in Standard at the moment in Turbo Fog lists. However, instead of gaining 3 life, it actually puts a counter on a creature you control. So you can play this on turn 2, and then on turn 3, you have 3 mana, you play New Horizons on one of your lands, and then the counter gets put on Incubation Druid, making New Horizons effectively free, giving you 4 mana, plus the Incubation's 3 mana as well, so 7 mana, 8 with a land drop the following turn, so that is a hell of a lot of ramp that you can actually get out of Incubation Druid. You can also use things like Hadana's Climb, which is like a guaranteed turn 3, put a counter on it. Same thing again, makes it Hadana's Climb effectively free in terms of the mana that you get out of it. Of course, you can only add 1 mana of any one colour with Incubation Druid as well, so if you do need to filter, you're going to have troubles there, but I don't think you'd have too much problems running something like Incubation Druid in a Hadana's Climb list. It's pretty solid. I want 4 copies. Give me them. 2 more packs to go. Let us see. We got Revival Revenge. Revival. Now, I looked at this card actually earlier and wondered if it was actually going to find a little home in my Squee deck the Legends list, because I actually do have a lot of creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less in that list. I have Danither, Squee, which doesn't really need revival, and also Captain Lannery Storm. So I have a lot of utility creatures that revival could hit as well, so it's kind of cool. And it's a 2-mana reanimator spell for those creatures as well, and Lannery Storm would come out with haste, making tokens, making this effectively a 1-mana revival spell. It's pretty cool. The other side is Revenge, 6 mana, 4 white and a black for a sorcery speed, double your life total, target opponent's life total, loses half their life rounded up. It's pretty cool, I like it. I could also see a deck entirely built around Revenge as well. I'm gonna basically be trying out this card quite a lot. See what we got for our final pack. Final pack has got nothing of note in the commons and uncommons. I should, in theory, according to the Reddit post that I mentioned earlier on in the video, I should have all the commons and uncommons right now, which is why I've not really been going over them. Gruul Spellbreaker, our final one, which means I've got a pretty decent Gruul deck coming up. So that's basically all of the packs. If we're going to go to our collection now, we actually get to go see our Ravnica allegiances. So in terms of commons, let's actually just sort out commons and uncommons. Let's see what we've got. We actually missed a fair few of them, funnily enough. So, as I mentioned, the math might be off a little bit, but I guess they also included the common and uncommon wildcards in that little bit of math as well, and I haven't really spent any. I actually ended up with 203 commons, 137 uncommons, 21 rares, and 10 mythic rares. What I would suggest is if you're going to do a pack opening of your own, unlike me, what I would do is I would spend all of my common and uncommon wildcards on the newest set before you open up your packs, because when you actually start hitting all of your commons and uncommons, it ends up being vault progress, and as you're opening packs, you're going to get the wildcards back anyway, and the vault progress will allow you to get more rares and mythics. So I actually refused to do that this time around because I actually wanted to see what the situation of my set would be without doing it. So, I mean, we're looking at it now. We've got quite a lot of 4 of. You know, if I want them, I can just get them. So, Terramander is another one that I really wish we'd had opened. Surprised we didn't see it at all, to be honest. 1 mana, 1/1. You can pay 7 and a blue to adapt 4 to turn it into a 5/5 flyer. It costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. So, it's going to be quite cool in Drake decks. It also has a Drake tag as well. God damn it, Drakes. And Shimmer of Possibility as well. In the blue-white amulet deck I played a very long time ago, that's going to be quite useful. Looks at the top 4 cards of your library. You get to put 1 into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So it's Sorcery Speed Anticipate that sees 1 extra card. It's kind of cool. I like it. It might see a few plays here and there. Other than that, I'm not really going to go through it all that much, but as you can see, like, I'm basically going to be able to get a full play set of all the commons and uncommons here without too much trouble. And add to that as well the fact that I will be doing my dailies and weeklies every single time I get the opportunity as well. So that's going to be another 126 packs that I can open before the next set comes out. So the collection you're seeing here will be doubled by the time the next set is released. So I should hopefully be able to build whatever I want. If we actually go into like rares and mythics, I imagine this is going to look pretty interesting. We actually missed Unbreakable Formation, which is like the best creature pump spell in the world. Creature you control gain indestructible until the end of the turn for 3 mana, and if you do it for Addendum, you get to put a counter on each of those creatures and they gain vigilance. This card is stupid. It will see a lot of play. Missed out on my Benthids, which is a shame, as well as my Angel of Graces. These are cool cards. I like them. This one probably won't see too much play. I'm kind of glad that I didn't see any of them in my pack openings, but yeah. So this is what the 90 packs will get you. Oh, we didn't get any Mirror Marches either. That's a shame. This is what your 100 packs will get you, including your rares and mythics. I will be spending those very wisely among the cards that I actually need for brand new decks in the future as well. Missed out on Emergency Powers. This is one of my favourite cards. I really like it. Bedeck. Oh my god. But yeah, if you guys are interested, I'm just going to do a quick scroll through. And that's essentially the set. So the things that we're missing are, some of them are a little bit shameful, you know. I really would like a Hydrog Crisis. It is cool. I'm going to probably get myself a few copies of these, but mostly what I'll be doing is filling out these godless shrines and things like that. Since, of course, like hitting 5th cards is no longer an issue, if I do spend my rare wild cards here, it just means that any future packs that I'm going to open won't contain lands, and they'll probably just contain useful rares anyway that I'm already missing, so there's really no downside to doing any of that. And also, as I mentioned, these are Planeswalker deck cards, so we're not going to be really opening those in packs either. I hope you guys have enjoyed anyway, guys. I'm going to leave this one on because it's probably run on for way too long. I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you have, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that little bell icon. If you have any decks as well that you'd like me to play, I am showing you my card collection right now, so as it currently stands, I could build any deck as long as it contains these cards, and of course I will spend some wild cards to make it happen. So if you want me to play any deck in particular and you're seeing the cards that it is built around, be sure to leave it down in the comment section below, or go to the Discord as well. Link is down there. The Discord does have an extra section for deck lists as well, for future subscriber deck series. I could critique your deck if you are interested in that kind of thing. Otherwise, I could just play it if it's a sweet little brew and you want to showcase it. So, thanks very much for watching, guys. Like, subscribe, hit that bell icon, all that jazz, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.